Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today, checking out this new album from Ringo Starr, Look Up. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So Ringo Starr just released his 21st solo studio album on January 10th. And like a lot of people out there, I grew up a big Beatles fan. I was probably 12, maybe 13 years old when I started listening to them. I think the White Album was the first album I listened to from the Beatles. It kind of grew from there. But as for their solo material, when it comes to the four of them, yes. You know, John Lennon had a couple of really good albums. George Harrison had a couple of really good albums. You know, Paul McCartney, I was never a big fan of his solo material, but I thought his solo material was always better than anything that Ringo Starr released. And that's not to say that Ringo hasn't created good music. He has. But I think that as far as like the overall quality of his discography goes, I think of the four members of the band, it's my least favorite. So when Ringo released the EP Crooked Boy last year, I was really surprised how good those songs were. Yes, you know, Ringo is somebody who's not known as a prolific writer across his career. I think he only wrote 2, maybe 3 songs with the Beatles, kind of sprinkled some writing across his solo career, but most of his career has been singing other people's songs, playing on other people's songs. All 4 of the tracks on Crooked Boy were all written by Linda Perry, of course from 4 Non Blondes. She's done a lot of really great stuff across her career. I think maybe that's the thing that's kind of hurt Ringo's solo career is he hasn't been able to rely on his own words, on his own lyrics for those songs. But when I went into listening to Crooked Boy, I was not really expecting much. I was expecting, honestly, to hate the album. And, you know, I loved it. Like I said, it's I think one of the best things Ringo has done in decades. So for the new album, Ringo teamed up with T-Bone Burnett, who, if you're unfamiliar with him, he was Bob Dylan's guitarist in the 70s. He's done a lot of other really big stuff, or he's produced a lot of big stuff over the years. He's worked on a lot of big albums. So I guess the way this worked out was Ringo just happened to meet up with or ran into T-Bone at, I don't know if it was like some kind of function. And Ringo had made a comment, hey, I'd love to have you write a song for me. And that's when T-Bone got the idea, well, let's not just write one song. I'm going to write an entire album. So there's 11 tracks on this album. I think T-Bone has writing credits on 10 of the 11, and Ringo only wrote 1 song off the album. And if you don't know yet, this album is a country album. Yes, I know country, these country crossover albums have been all the rage the last couple of years. Lots of big artists from multiple different genres have all done a country album. And you might think of yourself, well, this is just Ringo jumping on the trendy bandwagon. And that's not the case. Back in, I think it was 1965, I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but the Beatles did a cover of Buck Owens' Act Naturally. Ringo sung lead on that song. Ringo's first solo country album was released in 1970, so he has a very long track record of not only being a fan of country music, but also singing country music. So in typical Ringo Starr fashion, he does bring in some great musicians to help him on this new album. He's got Billy Strings on here, Molly Tuttle, who sings on multiple tracks on the album. Jess Wolfe is on here. Alison Krauss is on the last song on the album. So, and that's kind of what I think kind of he decided to do differently than a lot of other musicians do, where they bring in all these huge named singers on their albums. Think Dolly Parton's rock album that she released, was it last year or the year before, where she brought in basically like a who's who of musicians. Yes, all these are big name musicians, but they're not as big as some of the people that Ringo, of course, could have brought in. So going into the new album, I kind of had the same feeling I had going into Crooked Boy, where I wasn't expecting a whole lot, but honestly, I didn't really know what to expect either. I knew this was a country album. I didn't know what path of country he would go with this. So listening to the first track, Breathless, I think first off is a great way to kick off the album, really sets the tone for the album. But my very first impression was, yes, this has like an old school country sound to it, but there's also some like rock and roll influence. I think there's like some of the aspects of the song sounds like it could be straight out of like a 1958 rock song. And for being 84 years old, Ringo sounds really good on this album. Yes, I understand there's some pitch correction, some auto-tune, all that. It's 2025. There is on pretty much every single album that's been released over the last 20 years. And honestly, there's been manipulation to vocals for 5 decades now. It's nothing new. At this point, I think you're better off looking at it as just another effect. Whether it's like distortion on a guitar. It's just something else that musicians use. Just as long as it's not overly used, and it's not overly used on this album, I don't really care. Because I think it's the misconception that a lot of people have about pitch correction and auto-tune is it's going to take somebody who cannot sing and make them an incredible singer, and that's just not the case. So something that probably doesn't mean really anything to a lot of people out there, but is really important to me, is sequencing and track listing on an album. And I think the way they sequence this album works great. Breathless is a perfect way to kick off the album. Really sets the tone, it sets the direction overall. And first off, it's a very cohesive album also. It really has that same sound across the album, but primarily with Breathless and the closing track, Thankful, it has that, both of those songs have a really strong rock influence to them also. And I think they're the two most country rock songs on the album, so it's a great way to bookend the album overall. So last October when this album was announced, Ringo also released Time on My Hands as the first single, and it was met with really positive reviews. I don't remember reading a negative review of that song. I decided to wait and not listen to it when it was released. I wanted to hear the entire album as a full piece before I formed any kind of opinions of the album. And I'm glad I waited, because it ended up being one of my favorite tracks on the album. And I guess it really wouldn't matter if I had listened to it back in October. I probably would have still felt that way, but I didn't want to be influenced by that one song. I didn't want to listen to it and not like that song and then go into the album with this negative feeling, because, like I said before, I'm not a big fan of Ringo's music, so I didn't want to be prejudiced in any kind of way going into the first listen to the album. So the song After Time on My Hands is Never Let Me Go. It features Billy Strings, and it's a song that, to be honest, the first time through the album, I had it listed as one of my skips. And then I listened to it for a second or third time. I think it was by the third time it really kind of clicked with me. Ended up being one of the more enjoyable songs on the album. And it has this almost like a Doors Soft Parade kind of feel to the song. And listening to the song, it doesn't sound really like the Soft Parade, but it sounds like a song that the Doors could have made for that album. Comeback is really the only skippable track I've got listed on this album. I think a lot of that has to do with the way the song is mixed, and not really just the song. I think overall, the mixing on this album isn't great. I think the worst aspects of it really come through on the song, though. And it's mainly with the harmonizing vocals. They're just way too upfront. Some parts of the song, they're either more upfront than Ringo's voice. And it just has this almost like a spaghetti western kind of sound to the song. I think had it been mixed a little differently, I think I would have a different feeling about that song. Another song that I had kind of mixed feelings about is Rosetta. The first time I listened to it, it wasn't that I had it listed as a skippable track or anything like that. It was just a track that I felt was just kind of okay. And then the more I listened to this album, it sounds like it could be a 1968 Johnny Cash song. And I think that's kind of the vibe that Ringo was going for the album. So that's why it works on the song. And honestly, this is one of those albums where I think the more I listen to it, the more I'll like it. And then the album ends with the song Thankful, which is the only song on the album that Ringo wrote. And it's a return to this more like upbeat, almost kind of rock sound that Breathless had to kick off the album. That's why I said earlier, I think it's a perfect beginning and end to this album. So I think the big standout tracks on this album are Breathless, Time on My Hands, Never Let Me Go, and Thankful. I really love those 4 songs, and they're definitely ones I'll go back to. But it's not all sunshine and roses. There are some things I don't like about this album. First off, it's a little short. It's like 37 minutes long. Yes, it's 11 tracks, but it's 37 minutes long. I think had they added a couple more tracks to this album, they could have varied the sound a little bit more than they did. Yes, it starts with Breathless and Thankful are more like a rock-ish kind of songs. There's not a whole lot in the middle. It's very country between those 2 songs. I think had they added in like a couple more, like maybe almost like ballad type of songs on this album, it would have given it more of a varied feel across the entire album. Another thing that kind of bothers me is the mix and the production is not great on this album. I think it's more so the mix than anything, because there are times in this album where Ringo, who is supposed to be the centerpiece of this album, gets kind of lost in some of those songs. I think it's kind of a shame, because I think the album suffers because of it. And while there are some standout tracks on this album, a lot of the album is just kind of okay for me. I don't think there's anything necessarily really bad. Like I said, there's that one song that I can do without, but maybe if it was mixed a little differently, I would feel differently about it. I think a majority of this album is just kind of okay for me. And then lastly, and I know this shouldn't really matter, but and Ringo at this point in his career can do whatever he wants and put out any kind of album he wants. But there's really no, there's no meaning or message to this album at all. And, it's, I guess it's more like I guess the best way I could put it is it's like a nice guy singing nice songs. And I have seen some reviews that have absolutely hammered this album because of the pitch correction and the auto-tune on it. And I guess I kind of see both sides of it. Because first off, I mean, Ringo is 84 years old, so he's going to have to use some of that on this album. But then I also think back to American 4 with Johnny Cash, and where his older kind of broken voice kind of created some of that iconic status to those songs. So I think it is just finding that happy medium, because I'm sure there was some of that on that album also, but it's not, I don't think it's overly used on this album. At least there are some points on some of the songs where you can hear it, but it doesn't really jump out to me. I don't think it really impacts the overall quality of these songs. So overall, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd have to give it a 6.5. And I think that, yes, this is an album that over the course of the year, the more I listen to it, I could see this creeping up to a 7. But I think mainly because of the way it's mixed, some of the production decisions on this album really hamper the overall quality of it. I really can't give it more than that. And the other question I always ask is this an album that I want to buy a physical copy of? And probably not. I mean, I'll definitely stream this more times. You never know. It wouldn't be the first time I've listened to an album and wasn't a huge fan of it. And then, I listened to it a dozen or a dozen and a half times, and it really grows on me. This could, be one of those instances. But at this point, I'm going to say no. Maybe I'll grab it on CD, but I probably won't grab a copy of it on vinyl. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Love to know what you guys think of this album. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it? Are you thinking about even buying a copy of it? Like I said before, and like I said earlier in the video, I've never been a big fan of his music, but listening to Crooked Boy, listening to Look Up, makes me want to kind of go back and maybe revisit some of those earlier Ringo albums. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure to give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And that's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.